Greetings all, and thanks so much for joining. We'll get started in just one moment.
Hey, Sam, this is Karen. Just wanted to let you know I'm going to make a few remarks at the beginning, but I have to go to a briefing for about an hour and I'll rejoin around 4.
Great, thanks so much. All right, staff, if you're good with it, we can probably get started. Let me know.
Hi, Sam. Yeah, we're ready.
Wonderful. All right, thank you so much for joining this meeting of the State Water Board Second Statewide Agricultural Expert Panel Working Group meeting on November 19th, 2025. I'm seeing more and more familiar faces as the process goes on, but I'm Sam McGill. I'm a facilitator with Sacramento State University's College of Continuing Education, assisting the Water Board with facilitation of the expert panel. Definitely my pleasure to be here today. I know it's a breakneck pace and really appreciate everybody's continued participation in this really great process. Before I hand it over to Chief Deputy Director Karen Mogus for some opening remarks, I want to run through some interpretation options. We do make every effort to make sure that these meetings are also accessible for any Spanish language speakers. I'll run through the instructions real quick and then turn it over to my colleague Mike Soler, who will provide the same instructions in Spanish. I think everyone's familiar with it at this point, but if you need interpretation services, please click on the globe icon. You can find that on the bottom of your screen. If you would like to hear any live interpretation of comments, public comment provided in Spanish, you must make sure to click on that icon and select English from the drop-down list. And if you're listening in Spanish, make sure to click mute original audio on your screen. For technical assistance, everybody just make note of that email address that appears in the bottom bottom of the slide, dwq-ilrp@waterboards.ca.gov, and staff will try to respond to your question as quickly as possible. With that, though, let me turn it over to Mike to run through instructions in Spanish.
Muy buenas tardes. Por favor, noten que se ofrecen servicios de interpretación para la sesión de hoy día. Para escuchar el programa en español, seleccione el icono del globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla que dice Interpretación. Luego, seleccione su idioma en español y de ahí en Spanish, y de ahí podrá escuchar todo el programa en español. Muchas gracias. Si tiene una pregunta o necesita asistencia, puede escribir al correo dwq raya ilrp arroba waterboard.ca.gov y una persona, alguien del personal estará ahí para ayudarlos. Muchas gracias. Back to you, Sam.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Mike. All right. Before we run through our agenda today and do a quick introduction for all of our panelists, I want to hand it over to Karen Mogus for opening remarks.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us again today. I'm like Sam, starting to get to know you all and enjoying listening to the discussion. I want to again thank you for taking the time, the panelists in particular, for taking the time to work through our questions and be so thoughtful. I also wanted to mention that we have been listening to the panelists and to the participants from the various interested parties, and we're adding a listening session on December 17th that will be noticed here shortly if it hasn't already been. So look forward to the discussion. I'm going to miss the first hour or so. I have another obligation, but I'll be back around 4. So I will see you. We'll be back soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. All right. Before we do a review of our agenda, let's go around the horn and introduce our panelists for today. I'll just read you off in the order that you appear on my screen. If you could quickly introduce yourself, then we will get started. We will start with your auspicious chair, Dr. Daniel Geisler. Daniel.
Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Geisler. I'm a cognitive extension specialist in nutrient management at UC Davis. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks, Daniel. Ali Montazar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ali Montazar, Irrigation and Water Management Advisor with UC Cognitive Extension in Southern California.
Thanks, Ali. Michael Kahn.
Good afternoon, Michael Kahn. I'm also an irrigation and water resources farm advisor, but based on the Central Coast in Monterey County.
Thanks so much, Michael. Godu Atume.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Godo Atsume. I'm also with UCNR. I'm a groundwater and small farms coordinator.
Well, thanks so much. Ruth Dahlquist Willard.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ruth Dahlquist Willard, also with UC A&R, and I'm the interim director of UC SARA, the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program.
Great. Thanks so much, Ruth. And Richard Smith.
Hi, everyone. Richard Smith here, retired vegetable crop farm advisor in Monterey County.
Thanks, Richard. All right. Did I miss any of our panelists? The list keeps moving around. I want to make sure I got everybody.
Thomas.
Thomas Harder and Hannah Waterhouse are unavailable today, but we'll provide them with a recording and summary of this meeting immediately after it is complete, as quickly as we can get it. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick look at our agenda here today. Really, so this one's going to be slightly different than the format we've used for previous working group meetings. We want to jump in first and foremost to a continued panel discussion of the draft question responses. All of the panelists have done an amazing job getting some great drafts in front of their colleagues to start thinking through. We will talk about those today. And that's going to be the bulk of the meeting. We don't have any formal presentations. We don't have any formal presentations scheduled like we have for previous meetings. The one additional item that we wanted to cover with everyone was just a brief discussion of schedule and milestones that I'll run you through. And the goal here, as things currently stand, our hope is to have a draft report out by January 14th. So I'll just walk through a couple of steps that will help us get there. And the big caveat that you'll hear me mention a whole bunch of times is that on December 5th, we plan to have a little bit more in-depth discussion with the panelists on whether, given the responses that they've seen so far to all of the questions, whether we need to think about modifying that timeline at all. So we'll talk about that briefly at 5:20 or so, and have plenty of time for discussion around that with all of the panelists. As we've always done, we will also have a short public comment session. We're scheduling that for about 5:40 p.m. today. I think at this point, many of you who have participated in a number of these know that we certainly appreciate you getting in touch with Division of Water Quality staff in advance of the meeting. This is listed in the notice. You can send that email address is available on the State Water Board's Ag Expert Panel website. If you're interested in providing public comment, you can email dwq-ilrp at waterboards.ca.gov. And I'll mention that again. So I think that's kind of the extent of what we have for you today. So at this point, I want to go ahead and hand it over to Daniel to kick us off for a discussion of panel charge questions.
Great, thank you very much. So we have draft response for question 3 and 4, and I would suggest that we start with these two. Hannah and Thomas are not here, and probably some of us, while we discuss these questions, or we may have additional comments that come to mind after the meeting. So I would suggest that we also have the possibility to submit additional comments to Sam and the Water Board, and then Sam can compile them and send them out for our next meeting. But I think if Ruth and Gudu, would you like to start and talk about question 3 or your response to question 3 and lead the discussion on that?
Yes, we can get started. Thank you. Or do you want to start? I can start. That's fine.
I can just say something short, and then if you want to add anything, go ahead. I think we tried to capture the comments from the previous discussion on what additional complexity might there be in addition to A&R in determining nitrogen not used by the crop at the end of the season. So I think it'd be helpful for everyone to look over and just see, did we get everything from that discussion that you wanted to include? Do you want to add any more detail or any changes? And so we're trying to go with that question 3, going with Appendix C from the 2014 report that was highlighted in the last time when Darren Felimas also gave more clarity on that. So yeah, do you want to add anything to that, Godo?
That sounds good.
So could you put it up on the screen, your response? Do you have it ready to share it on the screen?
It looks like it's up there. I think Sam has put it up.
Oh yeah, I looked at the wrong screen. Sorry. Thank you.
No worries.
So just let me know if you like me to scroll down.
Okay, so maybe I can also share. The first page that folks are looking at here is just the background to the question. So this is just copied and pasted from Appendix C of the first Ag Expert Panel. There was a question we had here for the panel. Maybe we can go through the whole document and I will come back to this question. The second part of their Appendix C was really around A/R and how maybe we wanted to approach having that in our own report or as part of our recommendations. And so we can have that discussion. But really what we did was to break down the first bullet point. So from 12 down to 20, which is really asking us a question around the nitrogen mass balance and if there's more information. So we provided some information based on the conversation. And then we specifically sort of called out the leaching factors. So line 20 there, and provided more information based on the presentations that have been given to us. If you scroll down some, we tried to summarize the response based on the conversation on Friday. It sounds like as a panel, we do agree that we've made some scientific advances since 2014 in understanding some of these processes. Sam, can you scroll up a little bit? I can also share my screen if that's fine.
Yes, that's probably more efficient. Please do.
Sounds good. Is everyone able to see that?
Yes.
Yep.
And Ruth, I'm just providing an overview of the first responses, and then I can hand
Yeah,
over to you.
go for it.
And so for our response here, our conclusion from last Friday was that as a panel, we do agree that there's been some scientific advances since that time in understanding nitrogen mass balance. And then we also share that maybe some more research will be needed when it comes to some of the processes like volatilization. And then we put in some language here around the SWOT model that was presented to us last week. And our understanding is that it's tailored to the Central Valley currently, but that model, from what was presented, sounds like it can account for some of these other factors. So that's a consideration for us as a panel, maybe to discuss. And then so here is more so a response still to the SWOT model. A question was, do we want this to be tailored to Region 3? It's currently tailored to Region 5. Do we want this to be tailored to Region 3? And then another key question that we can discuss as a panel is how to utilize the SWOT model in tangent with A-R, and maybe just weighing those two options. And just my understanding of the SWOT model is that there's an input of the INMP data into that as well. So we provided that response there. And having just language at the ending, that's line 14 and 15, around whatever approach we utilize, ongoing education is helpful. Ruth, did you have anything to add on this particular point on SWOT model?
Yeah, I can add a little bit. So I think there's a general understanding that in the 2014 panel that A-R or A over R was an oversimplification because not enough data was available to do more than that. And that the CV SWOT model, in our understanding, provides a way to account for more things going on with nitrogen in the soil. One of my questions is, the Central Valley is using it on a township level. And so that makes sense because all the assumptions that are being made about temperature, rainfall, whatever else is going into the model, maybe make more sense on a broader scale and allowing for errors in one direction or another, but maybe that washes out on a multiple farm reporting scale. And I'm interested in if that tool can be used for individual farms doing reporting. For example, if a farmer reports A and R and that goes into the CV SWOT model, can you do that for one farm on its own, or do you really have to do it more of a regional approach? And that is something I'd like to learn more about. Because it would be interesting if you could report A and R and then get a number back that says, this is your A minus R minus these other losses into the system for your nitrogen, so that you don't actually have this entire amount of R available to your next crop that we're accounting for denitrification and volatilization and whatever else is going on. So I don't know if other people have perspectives on that, but I think that's the question about how can you use it in conjunction with individual reporting versus regional reporting.
Richard?
Well, I tried to get an answer to your question you just asked, and I haven't received it yet. But I know Sarah Lopez and Preservation Inc. they've looked at the SWOT model and did some evaluation of it for Region 3. And the conclusion, if I remember correctly, was that it had some deficiencies. So, but it's good that we asked the question, and maybe we need to get a more definitive answer. Maybe Sarah could help us with that. And as I recall, I was at a meeting where they were comparing just the A minus R, a more complete A minus R, with the discount factors and that sort of thing with the SWOT model, and they did come out close together, generating the A-R metric. And so I think it's worth exploring that, especially for region 3 more fully, because I don't have the answer, but I would like to know the answer.
Daniel?
So I don't have the answer either. I believe it's possible, but I would like to make 2 comments. One is, as Richard mentioned, SWOT may not work very well on the Central Coast, and we don't know about other regions. So I was wondering whether we should expand that point and say hydrogeological models are a good tool, and for example, SWOT in the Central Valley, but leave it open to the different regions to select their own model, their own hydrogeological model. SWOT may be good in some regions, but not in others. That was one comment. And then another comment, just for clarification, on page 1, line 33, you list denitrification, volatilization, immobilization, mineral nitrogen storage. Do you also mean that this will be provided by the SWOT model? And so I'm wondering, should we clarify that? Not that the interpretation is that these are things the growers are need to report in the future. I think that would be impossible. So if SWOT model or any model can provide it, fine, but not expect that growers have to report these values in the future. Probably just a clarification there.
I fully agree with both of those points, Daniel.
I do think the model, and I don't know if we have maybe Kenneth Miller on the call, he can clarify. I think SWOT covers that, not the grower, because I don't know how a grower would account for denitrification on their end. But my understanding of some of the work we've seen on the model is that it accounts for some of these factors. But that's a great point. That's a great point.
Right, the modeling would have to be done by the coalition or some third party and then provided to the grower or used in evaluating the grower's reporting. So the grower would only come up with what they currently report of A and R.
And Daniel also noted the points about just having general models and not making a recommendation. I think that might come up to the different regions to determine what tool works for their regions. I guess, are there any other comments on this part of the nitrogen mass balance? This is what we came up with in terms of scientific advances in understanding nitrogen mass balance.
Can we go ahead and...
Your point is good. I would just expand it to general hydrogeological models and use SWOT as an example of that's being used on the Central Coast. But other than that, I think these are good points.
Can we note that directly in the document while we're looking at it? Or what, Sam, I forget how this works.
Yes, by all means, we can make a note of it right now in the document itself.
This is a PDF, so I'm just going to take notes on my end as well.
Okay.
Michael?
I was just noticing, you have something about rainfall. So the rainfall that actually contributes to leaching, we call effective rainfall. And I don't know if those hydrogeological models can model that. It has to do with the intensity of rainfall. So there's probably a stochastic approach to trying to model that. But certainly a portion is runoff, and these models need to, I guess, allocate what rainfall infiltrates versus runs off fields. So it's just something that could improve that factor.
That's a good point. Yeah, I'm not clear. I don't know if any other panel member knows if how SWOT accounts for rainfall, the model. This example, this model we're using. If not, we can put that as a question mark just to get more information, whatever recommendation we're putting out.
Probably just write this answer a little bit more general and say, kind of leave it open how detailed the model can handle the different factors. And
Michael, is your hand still up for another question?
No, I just forgot to take it down.
Okay. Then we can move on to the next part of we're also asked about leaching factors, and our brief discussion last week, we talked about, I think we mostly talked about soil type. So we tried to also consolidate the responses that we discussed last week here. So for leaching factors, one of the main languages we had here was that it should be accounted for region by region across the state, just noting diversity in soil type, irrigation water sources, different crops grown, crop rotations, and then we do have rainfall listed here and crop removal factors. I know we had a brief conversation around soil type and characteristics, and we also had a presentation from, I believe, Eric Morgan. So we tried to capture some of the responses that we've heard so far regarding different soil types. So we have a recommendation here that the different soil types in the different regions should be factored into whatever tool is being put in place for compliance. And I'm just going to let folks read. And then, Daniel, we also have, I know you mentioned the crop removal factors that have been developed in some regions. We also put in that language here for the removal factors. Richard?
On line, excuse me, on line 26, you're referring to the nitrate, you call it nitrogen testing there, but I'd like to make that statement more precise, where we're talking about testing. Well, I can throw out this sentence, we can craft it better, but where we're measuring residual soil nitrate and adjusting fertilizer applications based on that information, rather than having it be kind of general the way you have it there. I think it would be good to be, more precise on that, because that's an issue that comes up. People say they do nitrate testing, but there's a certain way to do it that really helps you reduce fertilizer applications if you have enough residual soil nitrate.
Richard, would you be able to provide written feedback? I'm capturing what your feedback, but to that comment.
Yeah, if you want, I could craft a sentence for you there. Yeah,
that'll be great. Yeah. Daniel?
Thank you. So one of my comments was also, I think on 26, it should be frequent soil nitrate testing and not nitrogen testing. And then at the bottom, line 37, it says nitrate from irrigation water can be fully accounted for ahead of crop irrigation. So I think on the Central Coast, they use the approach that only the nitrate in the irrigation water that meets evapotranspiration is counted. And I think that's a good approach, not the entire nitrate. So I'm not sure whether you mean that when you say fully accounted or what the intention is here, but I think if growers apply irrigation water to leach salts, that the nitrate in that water just leaches through the root zone. So that's not going to be available for the crop. I don't know if it's the right place here to add that, but probably somewhere I would like to see that irrigation nitrate in the irrigation water that meets ET is a maximum ET is counted.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, also noted that.
Can I just add that in addition to what Daniel says, so we have say vineyards, they irrigate less than ET. So the language actually should be ET or applied water, whichever is smaller.
What line is that, Michael?
The one Daniel is talking about, I don't know.
Oh, that's line 37. Okay.
So maximum ET or applied water,
Yeah.
whichever is smaller.
Right. I mean, if they only put 5 inches, but ET was 10 inches, then you go with 5 inches. And the other 5 inches would have come from rainfall, during the winter time. But I have also a comment that I'm not sure I completely still understand this question, but it seems like some of these responses are repetitive of from other questions and sort of are prescriptive of what growers should do. I thought this was a question of more about what factors, if you're trying to model the nitrogen mass balance, should be considered. Not necessarily that we're in this place prescribing that growers provide all that information, or yeah. So, but maybe I not understand the question correctly.
I think maybe some of the area that's more open to interpretation is the language about take into account in future policy decisions regarding implementation issues or the direct enforceability of the nitrogen-related limits described above. So that's a good question maybe for staff. Are we just describing the technical background of what can be accounted for besides A and R in a theoretical sense, or are we directed to think about the applicability of those things for implementation and enforcement?
Hi, this is Erica, and I don't know the answer off the top of my head, so we will or could you repeat the question actually?
So do you just want us to describe what technical information there is available to better describe, something more complicated than A and R in what's happening to the nitrogen in the soil? And then you take that and you decide what to do about implementation and enforcement? Or do you want us to think about how it would actually apply ourselves?
I think I think the technical information, definitely, yes, that would be helpful to understand like the universe that's available to the extent that you're thinking. And then, but absolutely, it's helpful for us to understand the practicability of of collecting and using that information. So to the extent that you guys can provide that, my off the cuff answer is yes, but obviously there's like that fine line that we talked about during October 31st. So if you feel yourself kind of leaning into heavy into making, you could draw the line where you feel comfortable, but I think it's that practical aspect that we are going to need to understand beyond just what the technical opportunity is. So,
That makes sense.
Good.
Sorry. That was kind of like Daniel's point of we can recommend, well, there's this other information that can be calculated about volatilization, but the growers can't come up with that themselves. So we can qualify those kinds of practical aspects. Does that make sense? Ali, did you have a comment?
Yes, I agree with what Daniel and Michael mentioned. I think that's also important. Irrigation water nitrogen concentration, I think, is important because we need to address in question 5, also question 7. So it's good to make it clear. I think that there is some confusion regarding nitrogen applied to irrigation water, because I think we need to distinguish between germination water and applied water within the season, specifically for vegetables, because the germination water is a significant component of the water in vegetable crops. So I think somewhere we need to distinguish that. Even here, question 5 or question 7, do we believe germination water nitrate affects the same of the nitrogen during the rest of the season or not? I think somewhere we should make it clear. I agree, with Michael mentioned about the actual ET. If we go with that, probably we take out the germination water automatically. But it's good to mention somewhere, I think.
Ali, would you be able to provide your feedback written?
Sure.
That would be helpful.
Sure.
Yeah. And then I can move us along. We had, I think the other aspect we added here was around crop removal coefficients. And this was a discussion we had on Friday briefly for the different regions that it has been developed for. I'm not sure about this number here, 99%. So Daniel, that was a question for you. What level of numbers we have right now for region 5, and then for the other regions as well, for folks that have worked on coefficient removal numbers, the different regions.
For region 5, 99 is correct. I would probably write are available instead of have been developed, because some of them are based on a literature review with data that are not from California. So there is room for improvement, but with that literature review, we covered 99% of the irrigated acreage in the Central Valley, except rice, of course. But other than that, it's correct for Central Valley, yes.
And this does not account for like specialty produce, right? Bruce, do you know? Or niche?
So the really niche specialty crops, like the Asian specialty vegetables and subtropical crops are on 1% or less of the irrigated acreage, I would say. So I think that's fair.
Okay. Ali?
For the region 7, they are under development. It means at the moment we don't have, but we are in the process. By 2027 should be available. One concern I mentioned in the past, again, I repeat it because I think we need to mention somewhere. Even when we say for region 7, we have it by 2027, is not 95% or 99% of the crop grown in that region. I think going that far, it's really difficult, even for our region. If you look at, in the desert, we have 110 crops grown. 20 of them, the acreage for 20 is about 85%. It means 80 crops, the acreage is about 15%. So to me, it's really hard to believe we can even develop those in the next 10 years. It needs resources, it needs, interest. I don't know, So this is a crazy question, but I think we need to tackle, really we need 95, crop coefficient for 95% or 99% of the crop grown in each region. Or, I think I saw Daniel and Michael mention for the question 4. So perhaps if we don't have, we go just with A, not we don't consider even R. I think we need to mention this also somewhere. So what really we want to do? We think we will have this crop coefficient for some of the region for the 99% of the crop grown, or we should, have some alternative or some thoughts. Because for the desert, I don't believe we can do that. It goes for decades, for that 80 crops. We develop for 20, but it's 85% of the crop grown. We cannot do it for 95% because it goes, I don't know if we have people they have even interest, That's not my major to doing this. But because the region asked me to develop, because the coalition were under pressure, they needed. That's why I jumped to develop for 20. But I don't know if I can go with 80 more. And I don't know who was going to do it. I think we need to tackle that somewhere, some thoughts or something.
I may briefly answer to that, Ali. So we are going to discuss that with question 4, when no R values are available. The other thing is, I think if removal values have been developed for the Central Coast and the Central Valley, and you don't have specific removal values for the Imperial Valley, I think it's still better to use values from the Central Valley or the Central Coast and no values at all. So when you look at all the crops that have already been covered, they will probably add quite a bit to the 20 you're developing now. So it may look much better when you include the values for other regions in California. So I don't think you need to do 80 crops, but I don't think, well, we will see how far apart they are now that you develop values specific for the Imperial Valley, but I don't think using Central Valley or Central Coast values would be completely wrong or provide a completely wrong result.
Maybe just because it's related to, yes, the thought I have, we discussed this with you before, if we have for 20 crop coefficient for the desert for 20 crops, we can compare, those with the region. Of course, you don't have date palm. You don't have climb grass. It means it's related to desert. We don't have those numbers. So we develop here. But for the ones we have, probably we can do some comparison, and then we can decide, for example, 7%, averagely is more or less or something. I think then we can use those numbers. Yeah.
Richard?
Ollie, one thing that we, it's just an idea for you to consider is on the Central Coast, we had, this is in working with the regional board, and they were okay with this idea of having like a representative crop. Like we were trying to figure out, because there's so many different kinds of cut flowers grown, what's an approach for dealing with, the same situation you just described, such an enormous number of commodities. And so we worked on we selected a couple of flower species that we thought would be representative, that, at least growers would have something, some kind of a coefficient to utilize. So anyway, that's just an approach that we used here.
And I wonder for the other regions, I think there are 9 regions. Does anyone know if we have information on coefficients that are being developed in other regions that we can put in the document? Is anyone aware?
I'm not aware that there are any efforts to develop coefficients, but I may be wrong.
Ruth, did you have any comments on the coefficients? Otherwise, we can move to best practices recommendations we had.
Yeah, I think we can move on.
Okay. And then our understanding of the last part of the question around taking into account future policy decisions regarding implementation and enforcement, we just put in some language here based on our conversation from last week, and conversations so far. So I know that Hannah had some recommendations to add in cover crops and just the advances that have been made in understanding that. And we had Eric Brennan present on this. So we put in some language here on cover crop recommendation, efficient irrigation management, and then some language on education on the different management practices. And then we have some language on enforcement as well. And I'll just pause so folks can read text. Oh, go ahead, Richard.
Regarding the language you have there on the cover crops, again, if you want, I could craft some language for that, but I think what we want to do, Eric Brennan only talked about overwintered cover crops, but there's research going on here in about other cover crop strategies that also can sequester or scavenge and keep from, in a non-leachable form, the nitrogen over during the that winter fallow period. So what I would say is I would rework that first sentence, that first bullet point, to include these other cover crop strategies, not just overwintered cover crops.
That's great, Richard. Yeah, and is that research, is that being done by UC? And guess what are the other types?
Well, on one of the ideas, one of the concepts is fall grown cover crops. And Daniel Geisler has some studies that he's done on that. And then there's 2 researchers out of Stanford that are working with Eric Brennan. Actually, they're going to be testifying, I think, to our committee here at some point in the future. So we will hear from them, just so everybody, is aware of what the work they've been doing and then its impact on what we're recommending, what this panel is going to recommend. So I think it's really important.
Sam, did you have a question?
Richard just mentioned exactly what I was going to say. There are presentations lined up from Ana Gomez and Sierra Castaneda at Stanford, as well as Dr. Eric Brennan. So expect to see those in the near future.
Great, thanks. Daniel?
My suggestion would be to refer here to the response to question 7, so that we deal everything cover crop in question 7, so that it's not in different places. That would be my suggestion. And then another point to the line 21, you mentioned crop carryover. So my suggestion there would be to mention that it's best measured by soil nitrate testing. I wouldn't go further there.
Yeah, I know that Richard had made a few comments about the crop carryover last time. So Richard, this is also an area that maybe you have more comments. The crop carryover, that would be great. But Daniel, I noted your comments.
Yeah, I agree with what Daniel just said, and we can craft a response or feedback on that sentence for you.
Ali?
Well, I think since you already touched irrigation management issues and management practices, I recommend to add here, we recommend growers use decision tools like Crop Manage, I think, because it can directly help them with irrigation management and nitrogen management. So Michael Kahn is here. He didn't mention, but I would like to mention, to recommend that kind of tools, because at the end, it can help our growers, to implement best management practices for both nitrogen and irrigation. So specifically, it's good to mention Crop Manage.
Yeah, we can add language on Crop Manage. Michael?
Well, I was just wondering, it looks like these are, recommendations of practices growers should do. Is this the right question to put it under? Or is there another place that's better? Maybe other people on the panel could, chime in what you think. Because
Yeah, that's the question we had for the group as well. This seems to be the enforcement and implementation question. So what would be the best place to put practices for growers out of the 9 questions?
Yeah, good point. Perhaps before you enter the enforcement on the best management practices, because that tools can help for best management practices, right? It's before even you enter the enforcement. I don't know, but
Well, and can we tie it more to the technical information that the question is asking for? Of this is how it relates to that information specifically in the implementation and enforcement. Like, how is that being used? I don't know who's next. Maybe Michael?
I forgot to lower my hand again.
Oh, Richard?
Yeah, I don't know if this is the right venue for this question, but a couple of sessions ago we had a brief discussion about so here we are talking about practices that have been new developments since the last ag order, 11 years ago. And so I guess the question I have is, how is the state board operating? Are we going to take things up to just what we know today, November 19th, 2025, and then cut it off? Or can a region, let's say a technology comes along or a practice, as long as its underpinnings are, very solid science, can they step out of what we recommend and step forward? Or does it always have to come back to this expert panel process? So I guess my question is, how do we, this is addressing, progress since the last expert panel, but what about progress beyond us? And I don't know if this is the place that sentence or, paragraph addressing that question is included.
Hi, Richard and Annalisa with the State Board, and hopefully I can maybe kind of help. And this kind of gets into the presentation that Karen Mogus had provided on October 31st, and that, yes, we don't necessarily expect that the panel is going to anticipate what happens in the future. And so that's why the questions are based on, what knowledge, experience you currently have today. Please answer these questions. And the recommendations are kind of the baseline information that State Board and the regional boards will use as they update or as they issue, new permits, renew permits, develop policy. So that kind of gets into the regulatory process that we use and the data and information we have available at that time. So if we don't have a panel in the next 10 years, what new science we're aware of will certainly kind of be considered along with the recommendations from expert panel 1, expert panel 2, and then again, for all of our regulatory processes as well, we may go through a peer review in terms of, to account for any kind of new science and data. So hopefully that helps answer your question.
Would this be the place to just even make a comment to that effect, saying that, and in the future, new developments can be, what's the word, put forth, and in coordination with the state and the region.
Yeah, and I don't think that including it as part of the recommendations from the panel necessarily would make a difference to our process that we go through in the future as we develop new policies and as we issue or reissue permits. So I think the answer is, I think I would just defer if it's something that the panel feels strongly that they'd like to add to provide context to a response, please do, because again, these are recommendations for us to consider as we go through our regulatory process.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I mean, in that light, then I would recommend we add a bullet point to this question 3, to that effect. If you like, I could craft something, but or if somebody else has an idea too, that's fine.
Maybe Richard, I was sort of foreseeing, once in a while, the different regional boards would meet with professionals or scientists in their area and ask, what's the new developments that might help with, maybe giving, maybe on the R side or the A side, and just being aware of new technology or new data. If we have better ways to estimate dedensification, for example, or new techniques to remove nitrate from tailwater, something like that. So then they can add that to the sort of list of practices that growers can get credit for.
I like that, and new monitoring methods that might arise.
Mike, why don't we just write something up and we'll send it to Ngoto and Ruth, and then when this gets further reviewed, we can see what people they agree. Would you like to do that together? Oh, no, I guess we can't. You're in the wrong group.
Oh, I think Sam, don't you send it out to everybody after this?
Yes, absolutely. That's what I was just going to say. There will be an opportunity to provide written comment, but it has to come back to staff.
Yep. Sorry, I know that. I just
I know.
I always forget.
Daniel, did you want to comment? Oh, go ahead.
Yes. I think it's important to mention best management practices. Also on page 2, you mentioned soil nitrate testing. I think it's important. This question probably is not the best place. I can think of other questions where it fits better. But I mean, in our final report, we can add other sections. If we want to have a section on recommendations for best management practices outside our response to the 9 questions, we can do that. So I would say for the moment, let's keep it in here. And then at the end, we can have a look and say, well, probably all these things related to best management practices, they could have their special place somewhere in a different section, not related to any of these questions.
I think when everyone gets it for comment to send back to Sam, could you all flag those sections where you think they belong better somewhere else and what section that should be?
Yeah, that would be helpful. And then if, also just to Daniel's point, if folks feel like we can just have a separate section at the end of the document, which is just general recommendations, we can also add that. And then we had enforcement and implementation, and it was really a question of what should this look like for the different regions. So the first bullet point there is just saying there shouldn't be one size fits all for all the regions, particularly the regions that don't even have nitrogen applied information yet. And then we had additional, this is just supporting language to that first one, where we've seen high levels of nitrate contamination in regions 3 and 5. And you can also consider this maybe best management practices around on-farm well monitoring. And I think Act 4.0 had that element in theirs. And then we asked that implementation should take in the different factors in the nitrogen mass balance. Then we did mention CVSWOT 2 again. So I'll pause for the panel to read the recommendations on enforcement.
Daniel, did you have another comment?
So, yes, the same comment I made before to the second last point, line 10 to 12, again mention as it's a result from hydrogeological models and not reported by growers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we can add that.
Yeah, that was never the intent to imply that.
I think so. I feel more comfortable when we mention it.
Yeah, we'll add it. Yeah, it's a good point.
Right, absolutely.
Ali?
Well, I'm guessing, our intention here for enforcement is, implementing limit, right? Based on what we talked before, right? Because you use enforcement word here.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, I think, I think in the meeting in October we also had, I mentioned this, I think it's good to put it somewhere. I think if you want to go with limit, which I believe, a combination of limit and target should work for this process. I think as a general comment, we can make this in any region. You mentioned we should start enforcement with region 3 and 5. I think we also need to put a general comment like this, So any region should not jump in limit without implementing at least 3 years, some years target. I think should be somewhere because it makes sense. Any region having the data is not, enough, I think, because they need to go to the process, perhaps 3 years, I don't know, the period with the target, and then start limit, not jumping directly with having data to limit. I think we should go with a general recommendation somewhere.
Ali, I can offer one clarification on the line 6, and we can have a discussion about this as a panel. With the limits or the targets, there should also be some monitoring that is coming from the board required for those regions. So that was a note there. And this in addition to the responses we have in question 1 and 2 to have limits, and then factoring it with on-farm monitoring. Ruth?
I think it's right to frame it in the context of determining limits or targets, because that's really the question, isn't it? Is if you're going to just use A and R to determine those limits or targets, or if you're going to use other factors as well that make it more complex. And I think we're saying that those other factors should be included, and maybe we need sort of a summary at the beginning saying something like that. What do the other things think about that? No strong feelings?
Can you just repeat what you said again? Sorry.
Well, I think the point of the question is, if I understand it correctly, it's what, in addition to just A or R, should the State Water Board take into account in implementing or enforcing the limits that we're talking about, or targets? So I think the answer to that is, yes, there is more information. Here's what it is, and it should be used in determining those numbers, right? Is that sort of the general point that we're saying?
Well, I think this other information is useful when you're doing modeling, but it's not information readily available to growers, right? I would hate to, require growers to figure out the volatilization or some of these other factors, but they're certainly useful if you're trying to figure out what's the impact of A and R on groundwater in the future. And that's sort of how I see this question, is like, what are the factors here that they should take into account with hydrogeological models? Is that
so the Central Valley, if I understand correctly, what the Central Valley coalitions are doing, they're taking the reporting information and then putting it into the CD SWAT model, and then that's being used to estimate what's going on at the township level and then compare it to a target. So it's part of not direct enforcement for individual growers or reporting for individual growers, but it's being used to set a goal for a township to decrease nitrogen applications to get closer to the target. And if I haven't characterized that correctly, somebody please correct me. But that to me that's sort of an answer to this question, right? About how can this other information, nobody's expecting growers to determine volatilization themselves, but there's models that can get at that. And so can those actually be used in setting targets or limits and trying to move a township or a region toward that? I think that's how I'm understanding this question. So I don't know if we want to say something about that specifically.
That's my understanding also, that you can use the models to run the future, look in the future of if you were doing these practices, what would it result in terms of water quality in the future? So I think this question's about are there any other additional factors, or can you make these factors better? You know, can they be improved, or you know, so the example would be not just rainfall, but maybe effective rainfall, to modeling that better. So I think we're in agreement there.
Richard?
I think, you know, Ag Order 4.0 expanded A-R to include those discount factors and credits. And I think that's something we definitely want in this process here. You know, now they didn't go as far as trying to include volatilization and denitrification and effective rainfall. I mean, they didn't include those kind of factors because they weren't relying on, you know, on a computer model. You know, one of the things we worked on was helping growers to just estimate, you know, biomass of cover crops. You know, Eric Brennan has a paper on that, I think, and you know, what's the C to N ratio of that cover crop. And so that's a little, you know, that's before we start talking about volatilization, you know, but they're big factors and we definitely want them included in this.
Daniel?
I just wanted to suggest, in the interest of time, it's an interesting discussion, but shall we stop the discussion on question 3 here? Any comments we have, we can send to Sam and Erica. They will compile them, send them to Ruth or to everybody, and then we can come back next time with the revised version, or work on the revised version. Would that work for everybody, or do you have any really urgent comment on question 3 right now? And for Ruth
I
and
think
Guru,
that's,
did you get the comments you needed to work on the second version?
I've noted the comments in the text of the draft I have, and Sam, whatever's helpful, I can share those, or to another version to send around with that in there, or we could just send it around to everybody to add their comments. I don't know. I know this is a maybe difficult question, but was there any clarification on the process of multiple people commenting on the same document at the same time?
There was our apologies, but it's probably not the answer you all want to hear. I think, yeah, if you have comments in the text, Ruth, and go to as well. I know you mentioned you were taking notes. Send those over along with everybody else's comments that they'll make over the next couple of weeks or so. We'll incorporate that into a single document and get it sent back out. I'm
So
sorry.
I'll just do it at the same time and send it to you.
Yep, exactly right. Yeah.
Is there no allowance to have like these two people look at it, then these two people look at it?
No,
okay.
that would constitute
right.
a meeting. Yeah, sorry.
All right.
Sam, do you send the consolidated, or you send each person's responses back to Ruth and I, and then we consolidate that on our end?
That is a good question. I'll have to look to staff on that. So question from Godot. After we staff consolidate everybody's comments into a single document, does that go back to the 2-person team, or does it need to go out to the full group in advance of your next working group meeting?
Yeah, it's the latter. So we will take everybody's comments that you all send us, and then put it into that one single document with everybody's comments attributed. And then we will send it to all of the panel members at the same time, really close to the next meeting date. So we would need everybody's input, you know, with enough time for us to have a couple days to compile all that information. So just a FYI that we can share this with you up to 2 days prior to a working group meeting if we have time to meet that deadline. And then you guys need to talk about it at your next meeting before you can work on it again. And yeah, sorry, go ahead, Tim.
Oh, I was just going to say, we'll recap all the information that Erica just shared in our brief scheduling discussion at the end of today's meeting.
Yeah,
Thank you. Sorry about that.
thank you.
So
Okay, great. Then Ruth and Godu, thanks a lot for your response to question 3, and we'll come back to it hopefully next time if that's possible for you to work on it. So then, shall we move on to question 4? Mike, do you want to lead the discussion? I have the impression I'm already talking too much, and you're probably all tired of my funny accent by now. So
You do a great job leading. I guess I could start, but so are we supposed to like write notes down as we get feedback, or is somebody else summarizing this?
I will take notes, yes.
thank you. And Mike, I have it pulled up on the screen. Everybody should be sharing it, but as Godu, I think, did on the last one, if you have the document and prefer to scroll through it on your end, I can stop, whatever you prefer.
Oh, okay. I can share.
Okay, let me stop my share if you're pulling it up. Here you go. Excellent.
Okay. On my screen, I see 2 pages. Do you see that? Or is that too small?
Yes, probably just increase the size a bit, bottom right corner, and then it will be only
Oh, okay.
1 page.
Okay. There we go. Yeah, so we just answered the question. Is A-MISR a scientifically appropriate metric to evaluate and quantify nitrogen discharges to groundwater, either on its own or used in conjunction with A divided by R? And then are there other methods or metrics that could help quantify nitrogen discharges? So in general, I think what Daniel and I were hearing, from the panel is that yes, A-R is a valid metric to use to estimate potential nitrate discharge. And it's appropriate for setting targets for the agricultural industry and what the main point is that these are numbers that are accessible to the grower and also can be brought back to grower management practices in the field, farm or ranch level. And so that's sort of what the second paragraph's about. And then the other point is that, you could use the A-R for specific crops, like in Region 5 is done where you have permanent crops, or cropping systems such as in Region 3 where we have vegetable rotations. And it allows comparison of, various fields and farms within the region. So it's a pretty good metric to inform growers how they're performing in comparison to other regions. Now the A divided by R metric is still, we felt, useful for comparing nitrogen use efficiency among growers, because if you're comparing it with similar crops or cropping systems, there may be a grower that gets higher yields but uses more nitrogen. Then another grower uses less nitrogen, right? But gets lower yields. So they both could be equally efficient, even though their A-R values are different. And so we wanted to still have that metric because, you'll hear growers talk about, I used more nitrogen, but I got more yield. So I was just as efficient or even more efficient. So we would keep that in so you can sort of look at that type of efficiency and remove, the absolute numbers effects. So, and then in terms of alternatives to A-R, I think, some of these things we said will be answered in question 7, how to improve the A and the R, especially the R part, and giving credit for using for organic fertilizers, having discount factors and things like that. That will be answered in question 7. Now, there's cases where you don't have reliable removal coefficients for nitrogen, or you can't estimate the yield very easily. And so we still recommend at least reporting A to have a sense of how much nitrogen is being applied in a unit area. But the efforts can still continue to make and generate those R coefficients in the future. And then in some cropping systems, such as maybe mixed container nurseries or small growing operations, it's just impractical to calculate R on every type of species they're producing. So there may need to be some research to estimate what a reasonable average R coefficient would be. And I think Richard gave a good example of what was done for flowers and greenhouse flowers, representative crop or species that you could look at. In other cases, we may have production on impermeable surfaces. A lot of nurseries are like that, or there's tile drainage. And so maybe there can be an option where if they are discharging tile drainage or they have runoff, they can monitor that or contain it and not even have discharge and just report there is no discharge. But some sort of monitoring of surface discharge so that you don't need to go through this whole calculation of R. So let's see, and then we talked about hydrogeologic models, which sort of overlaps with what we were just discussing. So I guess are there any comments you wanna add, or any adjustments?
May I briefly mention the paragraph on line 55, or could you include that?
Oh, this paragraph.
Yes.
Yeah, we want to make sure that it was clear. This is just for regulatory purposes, not agronomic purposes, right? So there's a much more to figuring out a budget for how much nitrogen a crop needs. And so, that would be, testing them out, understanding the amount of nitrogen the crop needs to actually, not just for what's removed, but actually how much nitrogen does the crop take up over the season? And then what are the other sources of nitrogen available, like residual nitrate in this root zone, nitrogen mineralized from residues of previous crops or soil organic matter. So all these things are factors in figuring out a nitrogen budget. But you know, so we just want to distinguish this A-R is really a appropriate metric for regulatory purposes, but not agronomic purposes. And there's other processes, you know, involved that we really can't capture with A-R, sort of microbial processes, predicting plant uptake, soil water movement, which cause leaching, or the water sometimes is moving up to the surface where we accumulate salts. So all these things are not taken into account with A-R, but from an agronomic perspective, you have to think about them. Does that cover it, Daniel?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So, yeah, so any suggestions or comments?
Did receive, just real quickly, I'm sorry, I received one comment from Thomas. He sent his apologies that he was pulled onto another meeting today. I'm gonna share it. I'll share his email directly with everybody. So just to be clear, this is directly from Thomas. You know, I think you touched on everything that his comment mentions, Michael. I think he took issue with the word most in most appropriate right at the start of your response. He mentions that A-R is certainly an acceptable model, but the Central Valley Irrigated Lands Program doesn't rely on A-R. Instead, it relies on a more refined method that includes detailed groundwater practice, soil, crop, water modeling, and with the SWAT software. He suggests that may be a better approach. But it's important to say that A-R is not also appropriate. So he does mention that A-R is appropriate as long as the most relevant subterms are included. Both A-R and the modeling methods are appropriate, and both methods have shortcomings that arise from data uncertainty, complexity, and heterogeneity. I would suggest we modify our answer accordingly. So I just wanted to flag that for the group as something from Thomas that he asked us to share with all of you.
Yeah, I think what Daniel and I were thinking is, yeah, there's a very important role for the hydrogeological models, which Thomas outlined clearly. But they're complementary, is what we said. Yeah, essentially. But there might be a better way to word this right up in the beginning. You know, have a statement that we think A-R is a good metric because this is the data that's actually available to growers to report and can inform the hydrogeological models. The hydrogeological models can help inform what the impact of grower practices are on the groundwater nitrate. So you sort of need both.
I think we can probably delete the word most on line 10. Just say, yes, they are appropriate and leave it open whether they're most appropriate or just appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, we could do that. That's the simple way. But it might be nice to have a statement, you know, sort of overall and how they work together.
Yeah, definitely.
Ollie.
I think Ruth started first, I think.
Thanks. Well, just a high level comment. I think that with Thomas's email and then those two sections at the end there, lines 55 to 72, I think to me that actually is the answer to question 3 in a way. I mean, isn't that kind of the same thing that we're talking about? Because when question 3 was clarified for us by Darren Polimas, he referred back to is A/R or A-R the right metric, or is anything else involved? And I think that's really what this is also about. So it's sort of another question about where does everything belong? And I think there's a lot of overlap between the charge questions 3 and 4, especially after question 3 was clarified by the water board staff. So I wonder, maybe it's fine to talk about it in both places too, as long as we're not contradicting each other. between question 3 and 4.
Yeah, I agree. And you might decide, maybe, because I thought of this question as sort of an overall, like not getting the weeds of all the different factors that are in the models, but just, is this a good approach? In question 3, should maybe talk about the factors that would be used in the hydrogeological models. And make, so.
Right, as long as our recommendations are consistent in
Yeah,
question 3 and 4, because right now in question 3, it sounds like we maybe are recommending that they be incorporated into implementation and enforcement in some way. And then here it says they're not recommended to be included in A-R. So as long as those two match up, I'm not sure if right now if they do.
And if I could maybe just add a little bit of context to that specific question. I think staff posed this question for the panel because the first ag expert panel really just recommended A over R and just kind of brought in the concept of applied versus removed. And as Darren had mentioned, A-R was something that we as staff at the water boards had kind of included in as another way to look at, efficiencies. And so that's kind of the reason why we had included it here, just as we recognize that it wasn't included by the first panel. This is a opportunity with the second panel, maybe to just see your thoughts in terms of we as the water boards adding A-R.
So this is about A-R versus A over R, is that correct?
Yes.
And then question 3 is about the other factors.
Correct. So 4 really is just recognizing that we had added on the concept of A-R that wasn't mentioned by the panel.
Right.
It's kind of, as I think Michael said, it's like a catch-all, like from the first panel, are there any factors that, were not considered that we should be considering now that time has passed?
Right. That's very helpful. I wonder, what does everyone think about these last 2 paragraphs? Could we move some of this to question 3 and then have a reference here of something like as discussed in question 3, kind of like you did for question 7 earlier? So I feel like would be very good to include in question 3. I think it would, especially if it were maybe more upfront, it would be a good way to set the introduction of that question.
I think we could definitely move 55 to 62. Question 4 also mentions, are there any other methods or metrics?
Right,
so I
right.
think we need to mention the hydrogeological models here too.
Yeah.
Right.
So that I would like to keep that paragraph probably here, but what we describe in 55 to 62, that could be moved to the answer to question 3.
Yeah, I agree, because this was sort of an add-on we just threw in there because we didn't know. We thought it's an important point, but maybe it doesn't answer this question. That doesn't pertain to this question, and yeah. But it's an important point, and if it goes better in 4 or 3, then we can move it.
So Ruth, do you want to include it in the answer to question 3, and then next time we can delete it in question 4? We will again discuss question 3 first.
That's fine with me. What do you think, Godo?
Yeah, that's fine with me. So I was going to make a comment that I think we can have the models in both questions. The factors that are being asked of us in question 3, those factors cannot be answered with A-R as we need a model to know about the nitrification. So we can have that from 64 down. It doesn't have to be the same language. We can still mention models in question 3 about accounting for some of those factors.
And I think we actually talk about different purposes. You mentioned model to determine what is denitrification and
Right.
volatilization. We mentioned the models here as something to at a larger scale. And also we mentioned here that if the travel time of water takes a long time, a model can really help determine what will the future effects be of today's changes in management. So we approach it from a different angle. I agree with you. So I think it can be in both places.
Yeah, we can modify the language and then maybe move from 55 to 62 to question 3, because that is also covering the nitrogen budgets. So we can make that change.
And Ruth,
Oh, I think there is, oh, go ahead, Michael.
I just wanted you to clarify once again why you want to move this paragraph 55 through 62 to the other area.
Well, it actually, I think maybe like the hydrogeological models, it can apply to both. I just think some of this information would be really great to reference in question 3, because it's commenting on the other factors besides A and R. But I see how it goes here too. So I don't know, maybe we can consider what language from here could be referenced in 3 or cross-referenced between the two.
Yeah, I mean, we actually, up above said, oh, these things will be answered in 7. So we need to go into the detail. And then I think the reason we put this paragraph in was just to emphasize that this is the A&R is data available to growers, but it's not prescribing how they should farm. There's other factors they have to consider in the practices. So it's really to figure out what the potential nitrate leaching is.
So Michael, when you say they're not recommended to be included in A-R at this point, does that mean for agronomic purposes or for regulatory purposes?
Yeah, for regulatory. We don't want growers having to, I think A and R, if they can get that right, it shows you the potential for nitrate leaching, right? If the nitrogen actually leaches, right? The potential. These other factors are more about what you need to consider in terms of growing a good crop efficiently in terms of using nitrogen, soil nitrate testing, considering nitrate in irrigation water, those type of things. You would be thinking about when you're making decisions on how much fertilizer to apply. But I wouldn't want to force a grower to measure all those things.
So I think we've established that we don't want growers to measure those things, but what if a third party or a coalition could estimate them? I think that's the difference between 3 and 4 that I'm seeing in our recommendations. Is in 3, we're leaning towards recommending that coalitions could include those other factors in their modeling in how they interpret A&R for implementation and enforcement. And so not the individual farmers having to report them, but the coalitions or a third party being able to calculate them or estimate them, and that would go into however limits or targets might be set, or how goals are set for reducing A-R. So are we in this sentence here, 61 and 62, not recommended to be included in A-R? I think we should clarify for A-R reporting for individual growers. Is that what we're saying? That the growers wouldn't have to report this, but we still want to leave it open that the coalitions and third parties could use that to, to inform their enforcement and their implementation.
Yeah, I mean, essentially we're saying this is not something that growers would report.
Right.
That's why we have the paragraph below about hydrogeological models.
Right.
That this is, if you want to try to look at what the impact of all the different management practices are on groundwater, then you would use these models to do it. And I guess we could refer to question 3 and say, the factors that should be considered or discussed in question 3. But so what you're talking about is really related to hydrogeological models and
Right.
not A-R calculation, which is just a metric for growers to report.
Well, could we add in line 62, not recommended to be included in individual A-R reporting by growers at this point, just to make it more clear?
Yeah. What do you think about that, Daniel?
Yes, I'm a bit uncomfortable talking about enforcement and models at the same time, because models they really capture the region, but use that for enforcement action. I think that would be a bit challenging. So for enforcement, I think A-R is the better metric because it's on a field or grower scale. So using models or a hydrogeological model and then using the model to, let's say, calculate what happens in field A and then tell the grower, oh, my model told me you're over, so you have a problem. I wouldn't like if that happened.
Right. But the coalitions that are using CV SWAT are setting targets at a regional level and using that as a motivation overall. So that's maybe that's more implementation than enforcement.
Yes, I like that word much better.
Yeah, right. But it's not just the information, it's actually being used to move towards something. So that's what I want to make sure that that's in there, that it's not just to understand it, but it's actually being used to drive changes.
But we can definitely include in line 62 in AR-R reported by individual growers.
Thanks for your patience, Ali.
Thank you. Hopefully I remember what I wanted to say. I wanted to support, what Thomas mentioned. I think the job of this panel most likely is to develop approaches, methods, but not go with the most or, to recommend specific things. I think we develop, several methods and then recommend, whatever the region and the coalition they choose, they go for with that. So the wording is important. The line 19, perhaps the same issue, but not in that level. I think, the way we wrote here, it seems we recommend, the specific crop-based method for region 5. But that's not our intention. Or we recommend cropping system-based method for region 3. I think if they do it, we can say, because we don't want to, limit them, that's their choice based on what, the region and the coalition decide. If we want to go with the example region 5, we can say, the current method in region 5, because the way we wrote, it seems we recommend. Or I don't know. Maybe that's okay, but that's just wording, you think?
Well, it definitely wasn't our intention because you're right, can be calculated. So basically, what we tried to cover is exactly your point, Ali. It can be calculated per crop or cropping system. Both is correct. And we just mentioned region 5 as an example where it's used per crop and region 3 as an example where it's used for cropping system. But we we don't say it has to be that. We tried actually to make your point. It can be used per crop or cropping system, and leave it open to the regions to decide what works best. But if there's a better wording, or would you prefer not to mention the example of region 5 and region 3?
That was the way I read it. I thought we recommend region 5 to go with that.
No, it
I
doesn't.
know, but
we don't use the word recommend. It just says can. And we wanted to give an example.
Calculated. Okay.
Yeah.
So it means we can even exchange those, right? First region, 7, 3. So that's not the intention.
Yes, so we can write, for example, A-R can be calculated for specific crops as it's done currently in region 5, or cropping system as it's done currently in region 3.
Please. Yes, I think
that makes
that's
sense
all.
for you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, Toto?
Ruth had her hand. Ruth, you can go before me.
I have a comment on a different section. Would you be able to scroll down to the part where it talks about not being able to calculate R? A little farther down, I think.
Yeah, alternatives.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
When we say efforts should be made to generate the data needed to estimate R, I assume that's both the coefficients or the yield estimates. And I agree with that statement. At the same time, some of it's going to be difficult to get for a while. On the next section, 46 down, I'm really happy to see that in there. I wonder if I really like the idea of estimating for like a mixed diversified small vegetable cropping system, for example, to get like an overall R that you could just use for that system. And I think that that's research that could be done. I wonder if another method could be using nitrogen applied and then coming up with reasonable ranges of N applied that could be used to determine outliers. So that if you're within this range of nitrogen fertilizer application for a small diversified system or a greenhouse system or a nursery system, you're probably okay. And if you're way out of it, then you're an outlier. Is that a method that could be viable? Like I'd love to hear what other people think. Because that's one thing I've thought about, is doing some kind of a sensitivity analysis or a just some method using known data on nitrogen fertilizer recommendations, and then putting that into a mixed cropping system, getting a range of values that would define what was recommended for that system with some variation depending on what crops are there. And then using that as an acceptable range of N applied, and then being outside of that would be an outlier that would have to come back into that range. Does that sound reasonable or not?
No, I think that sounds reasonable to me. What do you think?
If you're talking about A and not just a fertilizer applied.
Right.
I would
That's
like
right.
to have A and not fertilizer, because fertilizer really depends on, for example, how much is in the irrigation water. So, but only A, yes,
Right.
I would agree.
So a method of identifying outliers just using A and not R.
Yes. That's
Yeah, and all
good.
the other inputs, the irrigation water and residual, and you could include all those things in A if you wanted to.
Yeah, I just don't know if this is the appropriate question to say how you would use A. Then to figure out outliers.
Right.
If that's okay to put that in there, or should go to another place? Because I think in question 1 and 2, there was also a mention of thing A.
Yeah. Well, either way, I think as long as it's in there somewhere, I'd like to have that method as an option if possible. Because I think it does take the burden off of trying to determine many, many different crop coefficients for niche crops, or trying to estimate yield from systems that it's very, very difficult to estimate yield. So, and it's also a practical way of relating it to to actual practice.
I agree.
Yes.
If, on a per acre basis, a small operation is putting 1,000 pounds of nitrogen per acre,
Right.
and another one's, doing something like 100. There would be, that's really the objective, right? Is to identify who's probably leading to some nitrate losses to groundwater, and
Right.
simplify the process. That'd be very nice.
Well, could we just note either putting that here or figuring out what question that it should go under?
Let's put it here, and if it's somewhere else at the end and we think it fits better into another question, we can delete it again here. But let's put it in so that at least it's somewhere at the moment.
That sounds great.
Go and then Richard.
Thank you. I have general thoughts. I'm just thinking about A-R and getting us towards protecting water quality, which I think is really the goal of the RLRP program. And I know that I think Region 3 had shared some information, and even with having Act 4.0, just their numbers weren't going towards that. So just thinking about that, I'm thinking out loud. But then I have a comment on line 20, where line 20 to 22, where it says it is therefore a good metric to inform growers how they perform in comparison to other growers. And I wonder if we should just add the goals of RLRP as a supporting statement there, where it should be seen as a good metric to let them know that they're moving towards protecting water quality. So maybe we can add that as a line or just on consideration. So how you compare to growers is great, but also how you're moving to protect water quality, given the level of degradation that we have for the water quality. And then I was wondering if for line 31, if we want to have that at the end of this document rather than where we have it, and if to add the model. So we agree that A-R is appropriate and probably should be used in conjunction with A/R and factoring the different factors that a model will compute and A-R would not compute. So also just adding that language for line 31 to 33. Yeah, but I don't know what the panel's thoughts, those comments.
Well, I think that's
So we just write in combination with the model, see below, or see question 3, wherever it will show up. With that.
Yeah, that'll work. I think as long as we note that there are other factors that A-R doesn't capture.
So what do you think, Daniel, to take that 31 to 33 and put it all the way to the end and add on something about using hydrogeologic models, sort of saying what each one does, what the strength is?
I think I will keep it here, but probably at the end we could discuss the strengths and weaknesses of the two approaches. Yeah.
Well, I don't think there is of it as like strength and weakness. I just think they have different purposes and clarify what those are.
You can also add in the brackets Just saying, in conjunction with A over R and the factors captured by a model. So just
Yeah.
an additional supporting sentence.
Yeah, but this section here is all about A minus R, and then we talk about alternatives and then groundwater. So maybe you want a summary paragraph that ties it all together. Yeah,
I took a note at the moment. I think I would have to write it first and then see where it fits best. But
Yeah.
I wrote the comment down, so you can probably work on it to see what makes most sense. Where do we the less amount of repetition?
Okay, Richard.
Well, a lot of comments were made about, the metric of just using the A, because of the complexity of also developing an R in certain cropping systems. And I guess the thing that was coming to my mind was maybe we need to have some statement or clause in there about that's going to, I think, entail a fair bit of research, because I'm just thinking of like a container operation.
Mhm.
You might have somebody who's growing smaller plants and somebody's growing bigger plants, but if they're all in the same pool, you know what I'm saying, they might kind of separate out differently. Some are adding more nitrogen and some are less. So anyway, it's not that complicated of a concept, but I just think that maybe to add some statement about that the use of this metric should be, coupled with research that helps understand some of the variation that you might encounter, using that kind of a metric. Anyway, that's kind of what came to my mind.
So you'd like us.
Could you repeat it with research that helps understand the?
Yeah. I mean, it might shake out very nicely, but my guess is that it may not, based on the diversity of the operations, and I'm thinking kind of specifically of like container type operations. There's so many different products that they produce, and so anyway, I just think saying something about this kind of data needs to be carefully evaluated, rather than just putting people on that bell curve and saying, okay, you're an outlier. You know what I'm saying? That wouldn't be fair, possibly, to some operations.
Yeah, and we 49 through 50 here is sort of I think says what you're suggesting.
Okay.
Research will be needed to estimate a reasonable average R coefficient for a group of similar crops, or a discharge factor based on A.
Yeah, actually, there you go. Okay, I'm sorry I missed that. That kind of pretty much gets at what I'm talking about.
Good. And yeah, certainly, in the container nursery, I could see, if you have records of A for the nursery, and you have a place in the nursery where you can monitor discharge of runoff and monitor what the concentration of nitrogen is, and if you knew the volume and the concentration, you can essentially say, well, what percentage of that nitrogen applied is leaving or could leave, if it's contained in a pond. or something like that and reused. But that would be a opportunity for those people who work with nurseries to do some research in that area, figure that out.
Great. Do we have more comments, or shall we also do the same as with question 3? If you have other comments, send them to Sam, and he can compile them, and then we work on a revision. Are there any urgent comments or suggestions?
And I'll remind you, well, I think we will have some people from nurseries talking about their challenges in estimating A and R in the listening session. Sam could probably verify that.
Yes, either the listening session or one of these work group meetings, but we have been in touch with them and we will get that scheduled.
Okay, great. Then thanks a lot, Mike. So we have about half an hour left or so. Shall we move on to question 5 and have an initial discussion? Ali, you and Thomas submitted a draft, but would you mind if we just started the discussion today? Everybody can chime in and then go to the draft afterwards.
Sure. I wish Thomas was here because he initiated. But we can, it's just, some thought we added there. Well, as
So
you
I
can,
just,
yeah, go ahead, please.
sorry. I just like to show 2 slides. So that's question 5, and it mentions additional aspects of the summary tables. And I just copied these summary tables from the East San Joaquin Valley Coalition to show what they actually include in case you haven't had a chance. So that's page 2. Page 1 of the summary table is a general overview of the farm, and then page 2 is really the information needed to calculate A minus R, basically all the things we have discussed so far. But then there is additional data that is requested on a field or management unit basis. So each line, or there would be different lines, each line would be a field or management unit, and the growers have to provide information on their irrigation method, the primary, secondary, on irrigation efficiency practices, the different options, and also nitrogen efficiency practices. So these are the data. I think none of that was mentioned in by the expert panel 1, but it is now included in the data that is reported. And as far as I understand question 5, it is related, among other things, to these different practices that are being reported.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. Well, we put some thoughts, Thomas mentioned we added more question than response. But, this is the understanding we have. I'll go through, the point I made in this draft mostly. And next time Thomas will be here and we'll continue. I think, a lot of information there. One discussion we had with Thomas, I think the region added, more than what the first panel recommended. Even I asked, the presenter last week, for example, why we need those efficiency information, even though there are great information for interpretation, what's going on. you know, what management practices growers they do, you know, in terms of irrigation, in terms of ET tools, in terms of soil moisture, you know, nitrogen management, splitting. There are all great information there, but I think they don't use it actually for A-R directly. Maybe some for modeling, maybe some because they want to know what's going on in the region to develop their outreach program or extension program. I think there are some benefits of those information, even though they don't use directly for A-R calculation but interpretation side, I think they are very useful information. A couple of things, you know, I recommended, I saw that tables, I think, you know, the problem is I don't want to put growers in, you know, to provide more information, but I think if you look at those information are useful, I think there is some lags, and that's very simple to complete it. I think I don't see any information related to the soil series. It's good because when you ask about, you know, management practices, we ask about everything, but we don't know what the soil is in APN. I think it's good to add it, and it's good to add it by growers because we know growers knows what soil texture is dealing with. I think it's good to add it, the soil texture and condition if there are some, you know, saline or salty condition or whatever, you know, is good to add by growers. As I mentioned, there are some confusion because in the table it says, you know, the nitrogen comes from irrigation water, but I also, you know, we mentioned about the confusion in irrigation water and the nitrogen. So we can distinguish, you know, between germination water or what irrigation water we are talking and what nitrogen comes from which water. I think is unclear in that table. It can be, you know, add something. You know, this summary table asks for information by crop year, which seems they assume there is only one crop grown in that specific APN or field. So how growers should, you know, provide information if there is 2 crops per year in that field? So it's unclear. That table is not, you know, it doesn't actually incorporate if you have 2 crops or 3 crops. It's just say by crop year, and you can put in one crop in that field. I think those are the information perhaps we can discuss, we should add or not, or what else? Okay, let me see what else I said. You know, I think one question also Thomas mentioned, we discussed a little bit here, you know, how this information should be available to the public. You know, we wrote perhaps in town, you know, sheep and the region scale, perhaps we can provide those information but since they are very field-based information, still I think they are kind of, you know, not reasonable to open it to the public in the farm scale or at the field scale level. This is also, we need to elaborate on this, you know, how publicly those summaries should be available. The other thing we discuss, it's about, I think that's a complicated part. So how this summary table should be, you know, audited. So because the region, it seems they recommended a third party periodically audit those information, which is very complicated. I think we need to make some recommendation. So how and which level? Thomas, you know, wrote some information. I'm not fully understand all of those, but please, if you have some comments about audit the information coalition provide to the region with those tables. What else? So please jump, because this is just some thoughts. So Daniel, please.
So yeah, the auditing, that's the last part of the question, but I would like to have a comment there. I think what we heard from the coalitions the first 2 or 3 years, it's really a steep learning curve. So I think the first 2 or 3 years the coalition starts reporting data, it should not be audited because there's a lot that needs to be improved. But afterwards, I don't think that's a question we should answer. I mean, it really, how much should be audited depends on the quality of the data. If the water board starts auditing and they find that 90% of the data sets have errors, that means, yes, more auditing is needed. If 0 have errors, less auditing is needed. So I would really expect the water board to have kind of experience based on the quality of the data to determine how much auditing is needed. And I'm not the expert on that, and I don't feel comfortable answering that question for the water board.
Thank you. Michael, please.
Oh. Well, that's part C of the question, and so I agree with somewhat with what Daniel's saying, but I think the issue might be is when growers report A and R, there's nowhere in the form that explains where did they get that data from? Like, what was the process in coming up with the A and the R? Is it fertilizer records from applications and fields? Is it bill of sales of fertilizer? It would be good to have information on what was the process of coming up with the A, at least. R, we know more or less, right? But definitely for the A side and A FERT, it would be important to know how they're doing that, because it's not really reported. And then if you want to do any audits in the future, without that type of information, basically the grower would just turn over a lot of records and you wouldn't know how to trace back to how they did the calculation. So there has to be some narrative or options to choose from of how they calculated it, I think. And then another question is, I'm not quite familiar with this form. There's an R part, right, to the form? Like they report their yield for each one?
Yes,
Or,
yes, they provide yield. Yeah.
okay, what about the amount of N sequestered in?
No, good point. You know, we actually recommended that. I think it doesn't include all the components of R we are talking about.
Right.
Just harvested, yield harvested, yeah.
And so I wonder why, you know, in the future, should there be one way to do it among all the different regions, you know, a framework? Because this is a direction they went, but it's a little bit different than the A minus R metric we've been talking about.
I may briefly explain how it's done in the Central Valley. So growers report yield, and then the coalitions apply the R coefficient to calculate R nitrogen removed. And for perennial crops, they also add a value for nitrogen sequestered. So both will be included, but it's done at the coalition level and the growers, all they report for R is the yield. But are sequestered in woody tissue will be added by the coalitions to the R value.
So you think we should add this because they ask us just the form, the table, and it's not there.
Well, it is done, and the first expert panel, they clearly wrote R is nitrogen removed plus sequestered. But probably for regions where they don't do it yet, yes, it could be added that R can be calculated by the coalitions based on yield and an estimate for nitrogen sequestered. If we want to be on the safe side that everybody's going to do it the same way of new regions.
Now, how do they handle, Daniel, the like prunings or removal of a vineyard or something like that?
I think at the moment not yet, because it's not known how much is removed when the prunings are removed from the orchard. If it's left in the vineyard, then it's basically recycled and it doesn't count. But I think at the moment, I don't know, but I don't think there isn't much data available about nitrogen removed with prunings when they actually leave the vineyard.
But what if like they're incorporated in the soil and they're very high CN ratio, that so they essentially would be like putting a high carbon amendment in?
Yeah, I think at the moment it's just treated like leaves or other crop residues. It's left in the field, so it doesn't count either way at the moment.
But I think overall the R part of this summary table is unclear.
Could we pull it up again to look at?
Daniel, would you mind to bring up that table?
So that would be this table here. So it's the parcel number or field number, the crop age for perennials, acres, and then all the factors that contribute to applied yield and what the unit is. And so that will be converted to R.
So that's the only R. Yeah.
Yes, only the yield needs to be reported by the grower, and all the rest is done by the coalitions based on the data they have. And I don't know, on the Central Coast, Mike or Richard, is it different?
Yes. I mean, it has on the A, I mean, some things are similar, but for example, organic amendments, we have discount factors, we distinguish organic fertilizer from chemical fertilizer. They have discount factors. On the R side, you can have other R's like cover crop. You know, so it's a more complex equation, I would say.
And the growers have to calculate it themselves with the coefficients, is that correct?
No, they don't have to calculate it. The data is available, but the coalitions are going to calculate R for the growers just based on yield.
On the Central Coast as well.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think on the Central Coast, the growers have to do it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, but they get help from Preservation Inc.
Right.
Yes, and they have a spreadsheet which assists them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would like to make an argument for leaving flexibility up to the regional water boards and coalitions in how they put these templates together. I think it's really important to be able to customize it to each region. If you scroll down a bit, there's these practices that are listed that many of these are specific, or they're particularly relevant to Region 5. And I think each region should be able to customize these types of things, as well as, whether it's the growers or the coalitions that calculate R directly. I really see the value of the coalitions calculating R as a way to avoid errors in calculation, especially when the coefficient is a long number with many decimals. It's not as easy to plug into a calculator, for example. Like I see the value of the coalition. I think it's great when the coalitions have the support and capacity to do that.
Richard.
On the Central Coast, and I hope I'm getting this right, but kind of what you're saying, Ruth, they have the growers are deciding which coefficient they want to use, and the regional board even had a process for growers developing their own coefficient, because like we, using the work that we did and the numbers also that Daniel did in his literature search, there's lots of coefficients around, but a grower, might decide that they have a higher, what I'm saying? So the point being is that it underscores what you just said, is that the regions might have different approaches, and they will, and they should be allowed to, to do what they need to do for their, their unique agricultural enterprises that occur in their region. And our region is a weird one, with this double and triple crop. It's got some idiosyncrasies, and so the regional board had to do things, a certain way. And Region 5 has the same kind of, any region has the same idiosyncrasies.
Thank you, Richard. One question someone might ask us in the future, I think we need to address now. So if there is different methods for calculating or measuring, crop coefficient, and then we are recommending, target or limit based on A minus R of the 85%, percentage or something. So if they are not at the same scale, so how possibly, because someone might ask, so some people may, provide those information higher A or higher A minus R, some lower, based on the calculation, not based on the real thing is happening. So because they don't have the same scale. And we are developing a target or interim limit based on what they report. And we don't know what they report. I think someone might ask from the panel this question, how we should address that question. Please, Richard.
Again, just what I've seen, the coefficients that we develop, they all have a range. You know this, Ollie, you're doing the same sort of work. And so I assume what Region 5 is doing, they're just choosing the average, and in Region 3, they gave the growers more leeway, in terms of, but the reality is, like the romaine lettuce coefficient, it's only within a certain range. So somebody can't choose some wild number, that's just, that will be a red flag, I would assume, to the region. So, but yeah, whether, within this range, they might choose a coefficient, that might vary a little bit from the mean, but how significant it is, that's up to the regional board to figure out.
Daniel.
I think for the reason you mentioned, Ali, I'm kind of in favor of just using the same coefficient for the entire region, because it makes it much easier to compare the different growers. And we know it's not 100% accurate, and we have to recognize that when we start talking about A-R and where is the target that should be reached, but at least growers can be easily compared. I'm just wondering on the Central Coast when growers can choose the range. So I would assume that all the growers just go for the highest value of the range. And so then of course that solves the problem. Then everybody's going to use the same value again.
Michael,
you're mute, Mike.
Sorry. I think when Preservation Inc. Does the calculations for the growers, they're just using the average. And I think the assumption is, yeah, there's variation, but after about, 40 lettuce crops for the season, they will approach the average, right? Some will be lower, some will be higher. And so you're only trying to figure out on average what is the end that was removed. So it's a reasonable way is just use the average. You can always go back and evaluate whether the average is still accurate, in the future. But after, I don't know, how many fields did you sample, Richard? 30 or so per commodity or more? So that's a pretty good average.
Yeah, no, we have a great average, but we also have a great range. It goes around those averages. So, and so that's the reality of those coefficients. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm not arguing for one way or the other. I might even be wrong. That was just my understanding about how they handled it at the Region 3. But you can certainly make an argument for just using the mean of that range.
I think it's a good argument, yeah. The mean, yeah. Guido?
Thanks, Ali. And thank you for your question. I have been thinking about that. I wonder if we should put some text in this question about the board doing like a QA/QC for nitrogen applied. Because my understanding now is people put in numbers there and no one's really checking the accuracy of those numbers. So we can put a recommendation there. And I don't know what that might look like. It might look like having more education on people knowing how much the numbers they're putting in, or if they're reporting fertilizer. But we can put in that recommendation for the board to consider that, where there's some sort of uniformity in what people are reporting for their different just on the A side of things. So people know accurately what to report for A.
Maybe one level of audit for all.
I think the coalitions also, we can put it in, but I think the coalitions look at the data and they look at the range, and if there are strange values, I think they flag them and contact the growers and ask them, is it really pounds per acre, or did you report tons per acre, or whatever? I think to some level, to some degree, it's done at the coalition level, but we can still add or include a recommendation that should be continued. They should continue doing that.
I think it's good to mention, because when the coalition are, at the early process, I saw, some mistakes on those numbers. It's good to mention. Thank you. Sam, please.
I just want to do a quick time check with the group. I know that we do have just a few kind of scheduling points that we need to go over before we switch to public comment, but I don't want to stifle the discussion right now.
I think, Daniel, if you have anything to add.
So, yeah, Ali, for you and Thomas, what would be the best way forward? Shall we, or do you want to first, based on the comments you got today, work on a cleaner draft we can discuss next time, or shall we already send comments to Sam so that they can compile them if you have additional comments? What would be the best way forward?
I think please send to Sam, and Sam can share with us. We incorporate all together. Yeah. Please send to Sam. Yeah.
Okay, so we all can send comments to the question 3, 4, and 5 to Sam. Sam will compile them and then make them available, and we can continue the discussion next time. Does that work for everybody?
Yes, but can you clarify if the comments should be directly for how we want to our view on the question or on what is already written by Ali and Thomas? Or both? So we can about make comments on Ali and Thomas's question and answer the question.
That would probably be the best way, yes. So then it would be the easiest way to incorporate these comments.
Okay.
I think so.
If you send to Sam, so we incorporate and send it again to Sam, and you have a clean one before the meeting.
I know that your response was structured a little bit differently. You posed questions back to the group based on it. So if everyone, if you are sending comments in, if you answer the questions, I can just make a bulleted list of everybody's responses, and then you can discuss that at the next meeting. And Ali, if you and Thomas are okay with it, then kind of translate that into a unified response to the question.
Sure.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you all so much. My head is kind of reeling a little bit with the depth of conversation that you've all had today on questions 3, 4, and 5. And I hate to drop more information on you, but we thought that it might be helpful just to run through kind of a straw proposal for what the schedule looks like for the remainder of the panel. I will note as I'm running through this that this is based on the assumption that we're still shooting for basically a January 14th end date of the panel's discussion before a public comment period. That could change, and I know, Daniel, we've talked a little bit about touching base at your December 5th working group meeting on whether or not that timeline needs to be extended or modified. But just for the purposes of these slides, we're assuming using the dates that we already have in the calendar. So I just want to caveat that. It'll only take me a couple minutes to go through these, and then we're hoping to have a few minutes of discussion as well. But I'll jump into it. And I only have, I think, 4 slides total. So Erica and I worked a lot today, and we've had multiple discussions with all staff and Daniel as well to think through what a schedule could look like. I already mentioned that the overall goal of this is to produce a complete draft of the panel report for public review and comment in the January timeframe. Similar to the first agricultural expert panel in 2014, the State Water Board assumes that there will be a 30-day public comment period to give all interested parties the opportunity to review the document. And very importantly, at the bottom of this slide, I wanted to note that during that comment period, the expert panel is basically hands-off with the report. You can't make modifications to it as it's being commented on by the public. That would sort of undermine the entire public comment process as folks are providing their thoughts. So we are assuming to stick to this schedule that your January 14th meeting, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, will kind of be the last opportunity before that public comment period. Staff will need a few days between January 14th and the release of the document. So we're thinking kind of around on or around January 3rd for release of that. So what does the schedule actually look like there? I already said we'll discuss this in a little bit more detail on December 5th. If additional time is needed, we'll have to revise this and get it back to you. You've received draft responses or straw proposals for questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 9, which is astonishing. I mean, I'm still just blown away by the level of input that you've provided. I know, Richard, you and Hannah are currently working on your draft response to 1 and 2 based on your last working group discussion. And I would just ask, and we kind of touched on this previously, if you could plan on submitting your comments on the remaining responses that you've received by December 1st, if possible, that'll move us a lot closer to reaching our goal. And Ruth, earlier on, you had mentioned around question 3, if there's sections in any of those responses you think might better fit under another question, in those responses, just flag that and we'll address it in the complete report of the document. Once we actually see how everything fits together, it'll be a little bit easier to fit things in the appropriate spots with your guidance. So on the screen here, you see all of the meetings that we have scheduled to date, beginning with today's session. Your next working group meeting is scheduled for December 5th. You have another one on December 12th. Then we have a public listening session on December 17th. You all received invites for this. And again, just a quick reminder, this is for the public to generate any comments on what they've heard throughout the panel process so far. If you are available on December 17th from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., you're welcome to attend that. It's definitely not mandatory, but anytime we get to see you is wonderful. And that'll be held primarily virtually, just like the last one was on October 1st. There will also be an in-person option that will be included in the notice. You have another panel working group meeting scheduled on January 7th. And then January 14th. This was originally the final full panel meeting that's listed in the charter. What we've talked about doing recently is kind of converting this to an all-day panel working group meeting. If you're not available for the full time, we understand, but it has been on your calendar. And this would really be a great opportunity to review that complete draft if we're sticking with something that is pretty close to this schedule. Following that meeting, we would then immediately transition into revising the document and getting it ready for public review around, like I said, January 23rd. And then after public review, after that public comment period on the document itself, staff will work to summarize all of the various comments and get a report back to you for your March 2026 meeting that we previously polled you for. This would be kind of the final opportunity for the panel to come together, review public comment, and hopefully, fingers crossed, endorse the report as your work product. So from kind of a visual perspective, just to provide you a little bit more visualization, we put this little calendar together beginning in November, and I can certainly make this available as well to help kind of move your discussion on December 5th along. As we've been thinking about this, we just wanted to identify important milestones. We are operating under the expectation that the bulk of your work will be completed by mid-January, but we didn't want to dictate the schedule of panel discussions for each question. These can be shifted at your discretion and as soon as your revised responses are available. But if we do stick to something like this, we really need to wrap up most of the discussions around the individual responses by that January 7th panel working group meeting. That's just to give staff a few days to combine everything with Daniel's assistance into a consolidated report for discussion on January 14th. And then, just a final pitch if we're sticking to this schedule that, once that January 14th all-day panel work group meeting concludes, it's kind of pencils down. We'd be getting it ready for public comment and get that sent out. So I know there's a ton of information here to think through, but I just wanted to run through a couple of additional schedule considerations, and then I know that that staff at the state board likely has a comment as well. Maybe I'll pause here. Yeah, if you could.
Just really quick, because this was just pointed out, and I'm so glad that we could make sure that the public knows. We will still host a workshop or a listening session or opportunity for the public to provide comments while we have the public comment period open. It was missing from the schedule, but just so you know, the plan is to still host a meeting like that, and we'll figure out when it is and add it, make sure it's on our calendar and everything. So just so everybody knows, we'll have one of those public workshops while the public comment period is open, and then close out the comment period after.
Thanks, Erica. So that would essentially just be another opportunity for the public to comment on the complete document.
Yes.
It wouldn't shift any of these other dates. Is that sort of correct?
Yes, exactly.
Wonderful, thank you. So just a couple of other considerations. We've kind of beat poor Bagley Key to death. But one thing that we'd really love guidance from all of you, and feel free to send your thoughts to myself or to staff. But we kind of need a clear plan of when the different questions will be discussed before each working group meeting. So just for the purposes of making sure draft documents are distributed in time and posted in the appropriate spot. As we've mentioned, there's kind of two classes of draft documents that we're working with here. After your initial review, draft documents are going to have some comments and attribution on them. These have to be included on meeting agendas, and they have to be distributed both to all of you for your consideration, but also the public in kind of the 1 to 2 day range, but before the next public meeting. And I'll mention this in emails. We've already talked about it at some length, but as soon as there's attribution on a comment, the documents require special awareness regarding Bagley Keene. Once you receive a document with attributed comments, we would just ask that you refrain from discussing it with your panel members. The concern there is that, if there's comments from one person that then gets passed on to another and another, it could constitute a serial meeting under Bagley Keene, and we really want to avoid that situation if at all possible. That said, I know some of you are also still working on initial drafts. If you have a clean or a revised draft without any attribution, those can be distributed as quickly as possible. So as soon as you have those responses, and I know that some of you are still working on a few more of the questions, we can get those out to people, even if it's not on the agenda for the next meeting. We can get those out to folks so that you as a panel can all be taking a look at them and familiarize yourself with them before they're discussed in public meetings. And just one final note here, staff is working very, very hard to get summaries, transcripts, and any comments on documents out to all of you as soon as possible. But I'll just make a pitch that the support team needs 2 to 3 business days to issue all of those different documents, whether it's transcripts or summaries, and compile them and compile comments on draft documents. So I know that it's moving incredibly fast. We just wanted to provide you with that information since we're kind of in the thick of it now. And I know all of you are working really hard on your individual questions. So that's all that I had for you. I wanted to pause here for any questions that you might have on it. And like I said, I know you'll be discussing this more, scheduling more on December 5th. But any questions from all of you before we switch over to public comment? And I'm happy to share all of these slides as well, just so that you have it. Michael.
So if we're not quite making progress by January 14th, can we request an additional workday?
Yeah, so the hitch there is that that there's noticing requirements for some of these. So we're really hoping that by that December 5th meeting, you have a pretty good sense of whether or not it's going to be possible to wrap your responses up. So we're really hoping if we can make that call on December 5th, that'd be really helpful. If we can just kind of pause that right now. There's noticing requirements, like I said, that just the legal requirements for getting public notices up take a while. We don't want to run afoul of those. So I hate to ask us to kind of put a pin in that one, but if that's okay, maybe we can reapproach it on December 5th after that discussion. If it's later in the process, I think we'd probably have to have a discussion with board staff and council. But Erica, I don't know if you have any thoughts on Michael's question. It is a very valid and important one, I think.
Yeah, I just would say that, of course, we want to make sure that you guys have the time you need. And so if you did identify on the 14th, for example, that you needed more time, we would poll you for your availability. And then we would we would pick the dates that would fit within that legal notice timeframe. So it might just mean, that there will be a gap between the meeting on the 14th and your next working group meeting, which isn't a bad thing. So so definitely if you see that and you have that concern, we want you to voice that concern so that we can, as soon as And we can always schedule and plan for more time. And then if you end up not needing it, then we may be, we can likely cancel those meetings. If you finished sooner than if things picked up and started moving faster again. So it's yeah, so it's just a timing thing, but we will support you guys to give you the time that you need to be able to fully vet your recommendations and provide something that you're comfortable with.
His response was better than mine. So the answer is yes. Just let us know as soon as you can. And Michael, you had another question.
So once all these questions are answered, they're going to be compiled in a single document by the chair, Daniel, and staff. Can anyone help him, or he has to do it himself?
Well, staff will be working, certainly working hand in hand that entire time, but that's another one that I kind of need to go back to board staff from. If several of you are working on it at the same time, again, that runs into some of the same Bagley-Keene restrictions. Sorry to put you on the spot, Erica, but is that correct?
Sorry, Sam, will you repeat the question?
Yeah, so Michael had asked if it's possible for other members to assist both staff and Chair Geisler with consolidating all of the responses into a draft report. I believe that could start running afoul of Bagley-Keene again, but wanted to.
I did actually get an answer for that today, so I'm glad you asked. Chair Geisler obviously will become the editor of the master document. We'll help compile everything into it. And then you all will have these meetings. It'll be just like the process that we're doing right now, where a clean version gets distributed and then you can discuss it at a meeting, and then everybody can comment on it. Chair Geisler can certainly have one co-editor. That's not a problem, and it does not have to be his the person he's currently paired up with. It can be. There's no reason, it's just a choice in who's available. So that's an option there. And then it sounds like there may even be an option to have a third person, but it's tricky at that point. And so that would be something that if you all wanted to explore that possibility, I just have to work with our legal counsel to get a little more detail about what that looks like and how do we support that.
So if we could just flag that as an issue, we'll provide an answer to you as soon as possible. I'm sure that everybody would appreciate additional hands on consolidating and editing that report. All right. So that was a lot of information to put on you all at once. As I said, we can share these slides with you following the meeting, so you have that kind of to help inform your discussion on December 5th. But before we transition to public comment, any final thoughts or questions? All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you so much for bearing with us. We know that it's a bit of a moving target, and really appreciate your continued participation in it. I do want to recognize, I think they both logged off. We had two of the board members present, board member Diano and board member McGuire. They've since dropped off, but appreciate them participating in part of the discussion. At this point, we'll go ahead and switch to public comment. I know, Ruth, you had a question to Ken Miller. I wanted to give you the opportunity to ask that question. And then we have one additional public comment at this point requested by Sarah Lopez. Just a quick reminder, I think everyone's familiar with it, but we would ask all commenters and responses, please limit your remarks to no more than 3 minutes and use the hand raise feature to enter the queue, and I will unmute you. Let me go to Ruth first, and Ken, if you're willing, I think the question will be directed to you.
Thank you, Sam. I just wanted to ask, because there was some discussion earlier of the CV SWAT model and how it's used in Region 5 with targets at the township level, and all this conversation around potential use of factors other than A and R alone in implementation and or enforcement. Would you be willing to comment on anything you'd like to add to that discussion, and particularly with regard to how can those models be used? On what level of detail, or how do you see them best applied? And noting that we're mentioning those in the context of other hydrogeological models. But I think there's still some things to be discussed in how exactly they can be used for communication with growers on individual parcels or regional use. And I'd like to hear any thoughts you might have to share, if you don't mind being put on the spot.
Thanks for that question, Ruth. And Kenneth, I'll ask you to unmute in a moment. If you need some time to think about it and work a response together, we can touch base offline. But Kenneth, any thoughts on Ruth's question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Well, I'll give some initial thoughts and can noodle on it more. You know, great discussion by everyone today. Certainly, you know, the reason or key reason that SWOT was used was because it's able to integrate additional data sets, you know, soil, climate, what have you, and connect that to what's reported in an INMP report and provide additional context to A-R and provide an estimate of leaching that considers the full nitrogen cycle and water balance and everything else. So I think, I mean, the way we're using it is certainly at a field scale, and it's getting rolled up to a township to look at a regional based target and value process. But it is used at a field scale in terms of its, you know, the communication of its results to growers. You know, the coalitions each take their own approach in how they talk to their grower members, but certainly there's utility in highlighting what the modeling is saying, because it is telling, you know, the whole story, or attempting to tell the whole story of what's occurring in that field. Of course, the grower knows what's happening, but putting the context of the nitrogen cycle and how irrigation matters, and, you know, crop uptake, all of those different concepts and principles that we all know and explain in various different ways. We like SWOT because it puts it into one package. And so there's of course the assessment value, developing leaching estimates with it, and there is an outreach value too in terms of educating on what's happening with the nitrogen that's being applied. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, Ruth. I can think more, but I would, you know, in short, there's assessment and outreach value to the tool.
Thank you. That does answer my question. I was wondering if it was being used at the field level, so that's interesting to hear about.
Yes, it is. It's used at the, you know, in fact, it's at the HR, you know, at the soil mapping unit level is the level of granularity. So if there's multiple mapping units in a field, it would create estimates for each of those mapping units.
Great, thank you.
There's a hand up from Daniel, and then we'll move on with public comment. Daniel?
I have a follow-up question for Ken too. We were talking about using SWOT to determine denitrification losses or volatilization losses on the field scale. So I was just wondering, how confident would you be in these values, or how confident are you that they really reflect what's happening in a specific field, or is it really more accurate at the larger scale? Or would you say, yeah, what SWOT determines are denitrification losses for field A are relatively or pretty accurate?
Yeah, I mean, certainly with estimates of everything, the bigger the scale you go, the more you know, approach, you know, as long as you've got a good method, you approach a good representation. But, you know, because we applied it at a granular level, we did a lot of effort to understand the tool and to calibrate it as best we could to the field scale. And so we know empirically there's uncertainty with these processes. We know that, but we used, you know, used available data that we had to do our calibration. You know, the things that are driving DNITE in the model are things that we know drive DNITE in reality. For instance, moisture content, you know, the amount of substrates of, say, carbon and nitrate, for instance. Those things are driving the estimates, and moisture content, for instance, is governed by soil type and climate and irrigation. So it's all integrated. It's producing a reasonable estimate. And I'd say, honestly, if anything, we might err on the side of being conservative, i.e. underestimating, just out of a degree of caution. But I'd say in general, we feel confident in what we're producing. And, it's certainly consistent with empirical data. So.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate that, Ken. Let me go next to Sarah Lopez.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Hi, good evening, everyone. So I want one quick comment on a different topic before I dive into some comments on the SWOT model. I just wanted to mention or make sure everyone is aware that the Central Coast Water Board takes a little bit of a different approach to the ag order to ILRP than the Central Valley Water Board does. And whereas the Central Valley approach is very coalition centric, on the Central Coast, the kind of baseline framework is much more focused on individual growers and kind of a direct relationship between the grower and the water board. And so Preservation Inc. is not empowered to assist our members with INMP reporting in the same way that Central Valley coalitions are. And certainly we've stepped into as much of a role as we are finding it possible to step into within the constraints of our order. But I just wanted to maybe caution that as I hear expert comments about, well, we could make this recommendation and then the coalitions would help the growers with it. Just to be aware that Preservation Inc. is not quite as empowered to help our members as a Central Valley coalition is to assist their members. So that's one thing. And then just kind of getting into the SWOT model. Some of you are aware, on the Central Coast, we spent months and months in a stakeholder advisory process dealing with some of the same questions or some of the same issues that are in your charge questions. And that advisory process hasn't formally concluded. And some of what we spent months and months looking at was trying to kind of get under the hood of the SWOT model and learning that it's not really just one model, but what is being used in the Central Valley is an entire approach. And that approach includes the SWOT model. It includes root zone libraries, which are not actually intrinsic to the SWOT model itself, and can in fact be used in conjunction with A-R or other models. It also couples the SWOT model to another model called NPSAT, which itself relies on basin-specific subsurface hydrogeologic models. And the Central Coast consists of many distinct groundwater basins, very few of which have existing hydrogeologic models. And so that whole coupling of the SWOT model, which is a surface model, to subsurface hydrogeologic models, we can't do that in the Central Coast right now because we don't have the hydrogeologic models. I also just want to point out that the SWOT model, and none of this actually is to detract from the SWOT model. I don't mean to disparage at all the way that it's being used in the Central Valley, just pointing out some of the challenges we have when we look at using it on the Central Coast. And so SWOT was not designed to model A-R. It's being used quite usefully in that context, but my understanding is that R is actually an output of that model. And we talk about things like denitrification. We have to consider root zone and vadose zone denitrification. SWOT can deal with the root zone, but getting at vadose zone denitrification is kind of a different topic. And then finally, two hurdles we ran into on the Central Coast when we looked at actually going ahead and implementing the SWOT model. Number one, it was there was a previous effort on the Central Coast to calibrate a landscape scale SWOT model, and it failed. And so we really don't want to see a regulatory mandate to use a model that we aren't confident we can calibrate. It would be great if we could, But that was done, as I understand it, in the Central Valley with the help of some grant funding. And I'm not aware of funding for that would be available to the Central Coast. The other hurdle we ran into is that the SWAT model requires timing of plantings to run. And when you're in a perennial cropping system, you can make some simplifying assumptions there. But when you're in multi-crop rotations and you have, lettuce then broccoli or broccoli then lettuce, it actually makes a difference which comes first. And there's not one unifying assumption that can be made because it happens both ways. And so we never, we certainly didn't make a concerted effort, but we never, we were not able to troubleshoot that effort, or sorry, that issue, at least, when we looked at it. And so I'm finding it impossible to unpack all of the complexities of trying to use the SWAT model on the Central Coast in what is I'm probably now going over my time.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll just stop there. Please don't give us a regulatory mandate to use the SWAT model on the Central Coast because I don't know if it's going to work. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Can I just say,
very quickly to Ruth, and then we do have to close out. Ruth, please.
yeah, I don't think that's what we're intending, just to put your mind at ease. I think if we talk about hydrogeological models, it sounds like we're going towards that generally rather than mandating a particular one. And obviously we'll keep discussing that, but thank you for sharing those concerns.
All right. I know we're right at time here. Really appreciate you all sticking it out. That was the only other public comment request that we received. Just real quickly, I wanted to run through a couple of action items before handing it over to Karen Mogus and Daniel Geisler for any final thoughts. Following this meeting, staff will send out current draft responses to the panel for all the responses that we have. We would ask that the panel review and send revisions back to me by December 1st. Staff will provide the transcript for this meeting, hopefully by November 24th. And then finally, revised clean drafts. I just want to note that revised clean drafts of questions 1, 2, 6, and 8. Those are kind of the next ones that we'll see clean versions of. That means not previously commented on. So expect to see those in the very near future as well. With that, we are at time here. And I would just ask staff if you have anything you wanted to share before we go to Daniel and Karen for closing remarks.
Yeah, I think we just wanted to double check. We definitely checked our inbox and we checked the chat. And organized too was commenting, but if there's anybody else in the room, in the virtual room, that had intended to comment, we just want to give you one last opportunity to raise your hand to provide a 3-minute comment, and then otherwise we're ready to move on.
Okay. Thanks, Erica. Any final public comments? Again, you can use the hand raise feature that's under the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. Okay. All right, with that, I'll hand it over to Daniel for any closing thoughts and then over to Karen Mogus.
We had a great discussion today, so thanks everybody for making this meeting a success, and see you on December 5th. Have a nice evening.
Thanks, Daniel. Karen?
Yeah, I'll just keep mine brief and echo Sam's comment earlier. I too am astonished at how much work you all have gotten done, and just really great conversation. So look forward to hearing more, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you all.